Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Buckeye Weekly Podcast. I am Tony Gerdeman, here as always with Tom Orr. Tom, how's it going?
Tony, it has been a contentious week on the internet between Ohio State people and Michigan people, even by the normally lofty standards of Ohio State, Michigan, and Michigan people on the internet. So, Tony, I feel like in this episode of the Buckeye Weekly Podcast, the Michigan Monday episode, I feel like we need to take a second and try and unite people. I'm a uniter,
Yeah.
Tony. I want to bring people together. Tony, why in the hell is Georgia ranked number one? I recognize that the AP poll is stupid and meaningless. What is the argument for ranking Georgia number one?
The argument for ranking Georgia number one, Tom, and these are what the voters think. In terms of the AP, I don't know what the coaches think. In terms of the AP voters, they're thinking, well, I put Georgia at one to start the season, and I don't like being wrong, so I'm going to keep Georgia at number one, or else I'll look wrong, and I don't like looking wrong, so I'm going to keep them at number one. That's it.
It does feel like the case for ranking Georgia number one in 2023 centers almost entirely around Georgia in 2021 and Georgia in 2022. Rather famously, those are not years in which the performance of a team is supposed to factor into their ranking in 2023. And again, it doesn't matter at all. And I'm sure what the coaches are thinking is, I'm going to screw up overtime strategy for some reason, because that seems to be what the coaches are always thinking this year. But I mean, I think the reason that this is a relevant question on this particular episode of this particular podcast is I think there's a particularly strong case to be made for ranking Michigan number one. If you look at just overall power ratings, a lot of the computer rankings, Michigan has, I will say for the 8th straight week, not played anyone yet, but boy howdy has Michigan beaten the ever-living crap out of all of the nobodies they have played. And at some point, beating the soul out of everyone you play, even if they are bad, does start to mean something. And I think we passed that point a week or two ago. And if you look at the power ratings, I'm just going to use the Kelly Ford power rating. Kelly Ford does the Calculated Risk podcast for us, along with Tyler Shoemaker. He has two separate sets of ratings that he talks about on that show. One is the power ratings, which is just how much better are you purely than the average Big Ten, or the average FBS team. So this is a purely predictive thing, forward-looking. It is not a resume metric. It's just how good can you be expected to be? Michigan, number one in his rankings, 27.7 points better than the average FBS team. Ohio State, number two, 27.2 points better than the average FBS team. Penn State, 3, Oklahoma, 4, Florida State, 5. Okay, totally. I would have no problem with Michigan being number one in the polls right now. In his most deserving rankings, which is a resume-based ranking, looking back, not predictive, looking back at who have you beaten and how much have you beaten them by, Ohio State is number one in that one. Florida State, number 2, Oklahoma 3, Washington 4. Michigan falls all the way down at number 8 in those, because while they have beaten the souls out of everyone they have played, they have not played anyone. So they're number 8 in that one. So again, I would be fine with Michigan being number 1. I'd be fine with Ohio State being number 1. I'd be fine with Florida State being number 1. If you want to do this as a resume thing and you want to say, look, hey, they've had, good win over Duke, good win over LSU earlier in the year. You want to make them number 1? That's fine. I cannot for the life of me make a coherent argument for Georgia other than, well, exactly what you said. I had them number 1 earlier, and I don't like to admit that I'm wrong.
Yep. Plus, it's like, well, they're going to start playing ranked teams eventually, so you'll see. You'll see that I'm right. And the thing that I hate about the rankings, people who do the rankings, when they're trying to prove that they're right, or they're trying to predict how a team is going to finish up, then it just becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. And I get so annoyed at things like that. As annoyed as I can get about something as meaningless as college football polls. But this information still goes somewhere. It still goes into the ether, where it is then drawn up through the roots of the college football playoff committee. And like some of that gets on them, and it's hard for them to shake. Even though, Tom, as we will talk about in the coming weeks, for weeks on end, they throw out the rankings each and every week. And yet they always look the same.
They sure do, don't they? Yeah, that is next Tuesday on October 31st. That will be the first college football playoff rankings reveal. We have not done any kind of official conversation because we are great at advanced planning. But in previous years, Tony, I know we don't want to base, as I said, we don't want to base this year's rankings off of previous year's performances. I don't want to base this year's editorial calendar off of previous year's editorial calendars, but we do typically do a live show on Tuesday during those playoff rankings reveals. So we'll probably be doing that this time next week. And I think there is a particularly compelling case for when that happens for Michigan to be number one, if you want to go by one set of metrics, based on the way that the committee has typically talked about the way they reached those decision. I'm expecting, assuming Ohio State beats, assuming they handle their business this weekend in Madison and beat Wisconsin, I'm expecting Ohio State or Florida State probably to be number one, just because they typically look at a, resume-based thing. And so I would assume it would align fairly closely with that. So, they'll say, Ohio State beat Notre Dame on the road and beat Penn State at home. And so they have the strongest case, or Florida State, the case I laid out earlier, one of them. But, I'm certainly expecting Michigan to be in the field of four, probably number three, I'm guessing, two, maybe. I mean, we'll find out next week. But, either way, you can look at any of these metrics you want to, and everything sort of says, yeah, Ohio State, Michigan, both pretty good this year, and both probably going to play a game of some significance on the Saturday after Thanksgiving in Ann Arbor.
Yeah, and since they do play each other, I would be pretty surprised if they have Michigan ranked ahead of Ohio State, because Ohio State, we don't know where the teams are going to be ranked when the rankings come out. Like right now, Ohio State has a win over number 10 Penn State and number 14 Notre Dame. We don't necessarily know where they will be in 10 days or whatever. But Michigan's not going to have anything. They're off this week. Then they have Purdue. Now, I will tell you, Michigan right now is 2-0 against teams that are also receiving votes. Rutgers has received 2 votes. UNLV has received a vote.
Boy, so, if you had told me 2 months ago that the strength of those are two teams that are having good seasons. And I think that a lot of that, I am not expecting Rutgers to be receiving votes for much longer. Rutgers' schedule is pretty backloaded in terms of the good teams they're going to play. UNLV, like Barry Oderman's done a good job. They're bowl eligible, I think, already for the first time in, I heard someone say the year I was 2010 or 2000. I mean, it has been a hot minute since UNLV has been bowl eligible, and they're bowl eligible on October 20th or whatever it was, October 21st. That is a good job. So, yeah, I mean, that's not a win that's going to show up on the great wins. I'm not expecting UNLV to show up on the top 25 rankings of the first college football playoff rankings. Nor am I expecting to see Rutgers there, but those are better wins than they looked like at the time. But they're also it's like trying to hang a real heavy picture on a real small nail. Like that's not going to support your college football playoff case. But it's something.
And we'll definitely talk about the committee more and more. But I think when the committee looks at an 8-0 Michigan, they're going to see the game control and the dominance and all of that is there, but you also have to look and see, why is that there?
Mm-hmm.
And that's where things start to fall apart for what I think would be Michigan's argument. And I think it will fall apart. And especially if Ohio State goes and wins at Wisconsin, I would be, based on the way we've seen the committee do things in the past, they like to reward those wins, at least initially, before they start changing their narrative to whatever they want it to be. But out of the gate, I would be surprised. And if out of the gate Ohio State isn't at the top or Michigan is above them, it'll all sort itself out. But it will definitely make me raise my eyebrow based on what exactly. Other than we don't really watch scores. We don't look at the final scores. We don't look at margin of victory. Well, what are you looking at then if you're ranking Michigan number one?
Yeah, and I mean, let's just, Tony, preempt the conversation that happens in these comments on these videos every single week. Yes, Michigan is a very good football team. Yes, it is quite possible Michigan is the very best football team in the entire United States of America in the year of our Lord 2023. Yes, it is entirely possible that Michigan will beat Ohio State this year. Yes, it is entirely possible that I'm expecting that there is a better than 50-50 chance that Michigan is going to beat Ohio State this year. All of these things can be true if Michigan is ranked 4th or 5th in the college football playoff, initial rankings that really doesn't matter at all. It is going to be a function of, hey, you played a bad non-conference schedule, and your conference schedule, the quality opponents are real backloaded. And, you can blame Michigan State for some of that, because Michigan State was supposed to be at least a halfway decent team. And then your head coach did some stuff, and then you put Hitler on the scoreboard, and then you scored 0 points. And, a lot of that had to do, some of that anyway, Tony, the 0 points had to do with Michigan. There was some self-inflicted stuff there too, with the rest of Michigan State's year. And the schedule is what it is. If Michigan had played UNLV at the beginning of the season, I don't think we'd be having any of these conversations, but they opted not to do that. UCLA at the beginning of the season. They did play UNLV. If they played UCLA at the beginning of the season, I think this conversation is just like, well, their conference schedule's backloaded, but at least they have that quality win out of conference. You don't. So we're having the exact same conversation every week. But again, yes, Michigan is very good. Yes, there's a good chance that Michigan is the best team in the country. Yes, there's a good chance that Michigan beats Ohio State this year. For as people have pointed out in the comments, I was not aware of this, Tony. That would be the third straight year that happened, if it does happen. I did pull up a chart on opponent offense adjusted EPA per play and opponent adjusted EPA per play on defense. And the chart basically is the further you are to the top and to the right, the better you are. And the two teams that are in the top, they have it kind of broken down by sectors. And the only two teams in the top sector are Ohio State and Michigan. And Ohio State's defense is a little better than Michigan's, and Michigan's offense is substantially, not incredibly, but, significantly better than Ohio State's. So, this feels like, hey, these are two pretty good teams. And no matter how you want to slice it, they're two teams that have kind of gotten there in a little bit of a different way. Michigan's been more dominant. Ohio State's played better opposition and still been undefeated. But yeah, I think this is going to be a pretty darn good football game coming up Thanksgiving weekend.
Yeah, I would tend to agree, Tom, but we will see. Now, in the past, talking about the Michigan defense, and they threw a shutout, 49-0 against, actually outscored Michigan State. The defense did 7-0 in that one, thanks to Mike Sanderstill's 72-yard pick six, his second pick six of the year. But I think last week I went and just detailed in terms of total offense where Michigan's opponents ranked, just to give people an idea that when we say they haven't played an offense yet, to express and show and prove that it wasn't, that they haven't. And people are like, total offense is not a great stat. It's not a great stat. I'm just using it to show informationally where the teams that they have ranked, where they have played, where they are ranked. I'm not saying one team is better than another, like people like to use analytics to do that. I'm not saying any of these teams are better than Michigan, for instance, but when I did put that number out, people were like, well, you got to take Michigan's performance out of it, because, clearly Michigan has turned what would normally be a tremendous offense every week, other than the one week they play against Michigan, into a bad offense. And so what I did, Tom, is I did go through and looked at all 8 of their opponents, took out Michigan's performance against that, and looked at where they would rank offensively in terms of total offense without that Michigan performance. East Carolina would be 128th in the nation. UNLV would be 19th, so there you go. Bowling Green would be 118th. Rutgers would be 103rd in the nation. Nebraska would be 106th in the nation. Minnesota 113th. Indiana tied at 113th. And Michigan State would be 95th. And so these, without Michigan having anything to do with these games, with those opponents, that's where those teams would rank offensively in total offense nationally. So when we talk about how they have not played anybody, this is one of the things we're talking about. But also, they have been fantastic on defense. They are doing what a fantastic defense would do against 7 terrible offenses and 1 overmatched offense. So they have done exceedingly well. They're giving up less than a touchdown per game. They have given up, Tom, I believe, 5 touchdowns this season. And I went through at cfbstats.com and looked at the number of touchdowns given up through the first 2 months of the season. You can go all the way back to 2009. I can't find another team that has given up only 5 touchdowns in the first 2 months of the season. So Michigan's defense is doing something that nobody has done in the past 15 years, I don't think it's entirely because this is the best college football defense of the last 15 years. In fact, I know it is not, but where is it top 10? Is it top 20? I don't know, but it is not so much better than every other defense that it has done. It is capable of doing something that nobody else has done without a ton of help from the offenses that they have played.
Yeah, and that's, there's another way to measure this that I've talked about on this show in the past, and that's the collegefootballnerds.com. They have a metric that I really like, and they look at a yards per play basis on rushing, yards per play basis on passing, what the opponent's average and what you held your opponents to as compared to their average against all the other teams so that team has played. And Michigan, in terms of rushing defense, has held their opponents to 26% fewer yards per carry on the ground than opponents. That ranks 15th in the country in that metric. Ohio State is 12th. So very similar. Both have been very good against opposing rushing attacks. Michigan against the pass, they are 11th in yards per attempt against, but they are only 3% better because those opponents have been so bad passing the ball. They're only 3% better than the average opponent for their opponents. So that puts them 50th in the country. Ohio State is second in the nation, 34% better than opponent averages in other games. Some of that has to do with just exactly how bad their opposing teams have been. Because if you're throwing for 5 yards per attempt or whatever against everyone, it is very hard to be substantially better than that. Michigan State was just an absolute dumpster fire on offense on Saturday night, and they threw for 4.6 yards per attempt. I mean, there is a certain, unless you were playing literally Iowa, there is a lower bound for how low those numbers can go. So, I don't think Michigan is really the 50th best pass defense in the nation, but this does kind of go to the point that you really have not gotten tested. And we talked about this last week in the lead up to the Ohio State Penn State game. Penn State's defense was, by the top line numbers, the number one defense in the country. And they played well against Ohio State, but also they weren't the number one defense in the country against Ohio State. And, Ohio State had, put up 20 points, but had a couple other times they were in the red zone and could have kicked a field goal, could have put up some more points than that. So, Michigan is very, very good, very, very good, especially on defense. But Tony, I think also we got to talk about JJ McCarthy because he feels like he's kind of taken the next step.
Yeah, he is, to me, the best player in the country right now in terms of quarterbacks. And if you want to argue Marvin Harrison, we can do that because at this point it is looking like the Heisman Trophy is going to be won November 25th in Ann Arbor, depending on who shows up more between McCarthy and Harrison. But right now, he is playing as good as we've ever seen him. Now, we could talk about how the defenses, a similar conversation, they're not really playing any top opponents, but the level of play that he's at right now, I can't wait to see what Penn State does with him because we saw a Penn State defense that Marvin Harrison was getting open. Other receivers were getting open. I don't think it was a shutdown defense, but they caused issues. So I'm interested to see how what JJ McCarthy can do with that, with his escapability, with the way that he can keep plays alive, with the way they use both of their tight ends. They really unleashed a 12 personnel package with AJ Barner and Colston Loveland in this one. Barner, I think 99 yards receiving, and Loveland was somewhere around 70 something with 2 touchdowns and 3 touchdowns total between the both of them. But he is in such control, and the amount of confidence that he has that led to his 1 sack, like an 8-yard loss, because he figures I can just get out of anything. So like you can do that against Michigan State. Can you do that against Penn State? Does that get you into trouble? Can you do that against Ohio State? Does that get you into trouble? But right now, I believe he might now be the Heisman front runner in terms of the betting sites, and the numbers, overall numbers, may not be what you have come to expect, but people are going to now be watching him and they're going to see plays, and he does seem to have Heisman moments each week, and he creates plays, and he's a playmaker. And if everybody else is coming down and JJ McCarthy is going up, like, this is no longer Caleb Williams' trophy to win anymore.
Well, no, it is certainly not Caleb Williams' trophy to win. Caleb Williams and Drake May both took a pretty significant shot to their chances, I think, over the weekend. McCarthy is the favorite right now, plus 240. Michael Penix second at plus 300. Jaden Daniels third at plus 375. Then a pretty big drop off to Jordan Travis, Dylan Gabriel, Bo Nix, and Marvin Harrison. Marvin Harrison plus 2,000, the only non-quarterback on that list. So, yeah, I mean, it's when you look at McCarthy, again, like you said, the numbers are not incredible. He's not putting up Andre Ware numbers or anything like that. He's not putting up CJ Stroud numbers, but he's putting up, he has been very, very efficient. He's been very, very effective. He makes plays with his legs when he needs to. He really didn't need to against Michigan State. That was, kind of one of those things where, he has made plays when he needed to. In Michigan State, that game was over so early that it was kind of like, well, there's no reason for him to take any shots there. But, he has made it work with a whole bunch of different guys. And what I think is most impressive to me about it, Tony, is Michigan has really not run the ball this year. They have not been, which is bizarre to say. Blake Corum, 15 carries, 59 yards, 3.9 yards per carry. Donovan Edwards, 6 carries, 14 yards, 2.3 yards per carry. Donovan Edwards cannot get it going right now. Blake Corum has been, he feels like he has one yard touchdown every game and, finishes with a stat line that's otherwise really unspectacular. And, maybe that gets going at some point, but it feels like that the run game just hasn't been there. So a lot of it has been on McCarthy. And even, this was a game where you didn't have Cornelius Johnson, 3 catches, 26 yards, long of 11. Donovan Edwards, 3 catches, 23 yards. Roman Wilson, who has been one of his top targets, 2 catches, 50 yards. But just there was not anything out of the wide receivers really that was impressive. But as you said, 12 catches for 178 yards and 3 touchdowns for the tight ends, and it's not just the tight ends. Colston Loveland has had a big year, but there have been, the Roman Anthony game. There has been, Cornelius Johnson has a big day. There has been Colston Loveland has a big day. But the one thing that's kind of tying this all together is JJ McCarthy. And it's just, other than the Bowling Green game, which is just looks like an incredible outlier right now where he threw 3 picks and he hasn't, I don't think, thrown a pick. And other than that all season, he's just been very efficient, very effective, kept them moving down the field. And, they have not played incredible opposition, but, they are in the same stat that I was citing for the defense, relative performance compared to what your opponents typically give up in yards per attempt. Michigan, 10.16 yards per attempt. They are 47% better, 47% better in yards per attempt than opponent averages. That's 4th in the country. Air Force number 1, 135% better. So if you can start running the triple option, you'll be better. Tony, there are only, other than Air Force, there's only 2 teams better than Michigan in terms of relative performance, in terms of opponent yards per averages. One is LSU at 50%. Which team is number 3 at 48%, 1% better than Michigan?
Is it the Ohio State University?
It is the Ohio State University. Tony, I'm starting to think that game after Thanksgiving might be a pretty good one.
Watching JJ McCarthy, I went and charted his in-the-pocket passes and his outside-the-pocket passes. In the pocket, he was 16 of 22 for 204 yards and 2 touchdowns. Outside, he was 5 of 5 for 83 yards and 2 scores. He's just incredibly deadly whether it's a designed rollout or it's even worse for the opposition, it's a scramble, because not only is he great at it, but his receivers are really great at it as well. And that's tight ends, that's running backs, that's receivers. Like, everybody understands where they need to be. And there's a high level of communication there once things start to break down. So continues to be impressive. He was 20 of 26 in the first half for 276 yards, and then threw 1 pass in the second half and in the third quarter, which was a touchdown. And that pass didn't come until like midway through the third quarter because Michigan Michigan State got the ball first and threw a pick 6, then got the ball again and drove a little bit. But one of the craziest stats of the season right now, JJ McCarthy is 4th on his team in number of fourth quarter passes.
That is, of all the different ways we've said Michigan has not played a lot of close games because they haven't played a lot of good opponents. Boy, that's pretty remarkable. And anytime you have that, I think everyone sort of goes, well, are they going to be able, are they going to be ready for a 4-quarter game? And I think they're going to play a 4-quarter game against Penn State to at least some degree when they have to go to State College in a couple weeks. But, they're certainly rested. And we talked earlier about Michigan not, the running backs not really having a big year. Michigan last year, the running backs, Blake Corum had an enormous year to the point where he was in Heisman contention. But then all of those 25 and 28 and 30 carry games added up, and he ended up getting banged up and, got hurt against Illinois and then barely played against Ohio State. He may not be having a huge year, but he's going to be fresh. And that's true for pretty much everyone on this Michigan team. They are pretty healthy because they haven't had to go 4 quarters. And Jim Harbaugh has been rotating so many guys through. You've got guys who are playing quarterback. I'm like, who? Like they had it was Jaden Denigal had 2 passes, 2 for 2 for 7 yards. And I'm like, what? Who? That's not Davis Warren. That's not Jack Tuttle. I mean, they are really getting down the depth chart. And that was a road game against an in-state rival. So, and he's doing that all over the place. They've rotated down the defense. They've rotated in the running back room. That has been a very intentional thing for them this year. And I don't know if that's just trying to get everyone involved or just trying to keep everyone fresh and healthy and engaged, whatever it is. I mean, whatever it is, it's working.
I do wonder what happens the first time they have their backs against the wall, because the last time they had that happen, they lost to TCU. So, coaches like to have that bit of experience, that adversity, and there's been absolutely zero adversity for this team so far. And so you don't necessarily know how they're going to handle it until they get there. They may handle it just fine, but I bet Jim Harbaugh would have liked to have known beforehand, because we've seen it in the past. The one possession game against Rutgers or Nebraska or Maryland where you have that experience. And so far this year, their experience has been, well, it's a 1-score game going into halftime, and now we're going to score 4 straight touchdowns. There's really been no adversity. So it's just something to watch. Now, the schedule, as you said, is very, very backloaded. It's 2 teams, basically. And I think both of those teams can provide some adversity or should provide some adversity. And we'll see what they do with it. Now, back to the running game, only one of Blake Corum's carries, only one of his 15 carries went over 5 yards. He had a 17-yarder. But in terms of the success rate, he had 7 straight successful runs, and 4 of them were 5 yards. It's boom, right in a row, 5, 5, 5, 5. And so 9 of his 15 carries were hit the success rate number, were successful. 3 of 6 of Donovan Edwards were, and he, again, there's no good numbers coming from Donovan Edwards this season, but I was just surprised by that number. And now the receiving aspect of his game is still a significant weapon, and they will continue to use him. But the running game, it's similar to Ohio State's running game in that you're still going to run it. It's not as effective as you would like. Ohio State can get by because they have Marvin Harrison. Michigan can get by because they have JJ McCarthy. And what happens if you take one of those away? If you can, clearly I think a receiver is easier to take away than a quarterback, but they're able to overcome the shortcomings. And at this point in the season, you are what you are. Now with Michigan, they are what they are. Ohio State being what they are, have dealt with injuries at running back. I wouldn't characterize the Kalel Mullings injury as significant as what Ohio State is dealing with their running backs. But I think I'm done waiting for Michigan to be able to run the ball. I think this is what they are, unless JJ McCarthy gets even more involved with it and hits some big ones. And if Blake Corum doesn't hit a big one, this is pretty much what they're going to be, 120 yards and 3 yards, maybe 4 yards a carry. And it might be good enough for now, but shoot, it might be good enough to win it all, because I don't think there are any great teams this year.
Yeah, I'm interested to see what that rushing offense looks like when they play at Penn State in a few weeks. Because, I look at McCarthy's number of carries, and I recognize that last week we talked about the fact that he was running the ball too much and taking too many hits. They didn't run him this week, and that's fine, and that's, probably smart. I think you might see the old Urban Meyer quarterback run usage thing going, because I think they're going to feel like they're going to have to run the ball at some against Penn State. And if you're not able to generate a ton just with Corum and Edwards, you might need to work McCarthy more into that game. And Urban Meyer, for the Michigan folks who might not remember this particularly well, when JT Barrett was Ohio State's quarterback, for example, JT Barrett would have 3 carries against Rutgers, and he'd have 2 carries against Bowling Green, and then they'd play Penn State, and he'd have 18 carries. Now, I'm not expecting JJ McCarthy to have 18 carries against Penn State, but if JJ McCarthy went from 3 carries against Michigan State to 10 carries against Penn State or 9 carries against Penn State, I don't think that would surprise me at all. And if he's able to present that +1 in the run game, maybe that opens some things up for Corum and Edwards, inside. Maybe that opens things up more just for, get him out on the edge and just, hit someone downfield as defenders kind of suck up to stop him in the run game. It feels like you're going to see more JJ McCarthy running. And then it's just a matter, this was the case with JT Barrett too. Just stay healthy. Don't get down. You get your butt out of bounds. You get your butt down on the ground and you slide. Don't take that big hit, because it feels like, the one really obvious thing that could derail this whole Michigan season is if JJ McCarthy gets hurt. No disrespect to Jack Tuttle, but I'm not going to lie. I have not watched a lot of Jack Tuttle because Jack Tuttle is kind of the human victory cigar where, as soon as Jack Tuttle's in the game, okay, the meaningful portion of this game has is over. I don't expect Jack Tuttle to light anyone up in the air. So if JJ McCarthy gets hurt, I think that's the one thing that could really be a big, big problem for Michigan. But I also expect them to keep him as safe as they possibly can. And I'm sure it has been communicated to him to get out of bounds and to get down and to not take any unnecessary hits, even when they do probably need him to run more against teams like Penn State.
I have been shouting all season long that Michigan is going to lose at Penn State. And after getting a good firsthand look at Penn State over the past week, I would like to amend my shouting to I think Michigan is going to beat Penn State. And here are a number of reasons why. I don't think Penn State's going to be able to run on Michigan. I expect them to get after Drew Aller quite a bit in the past game. I don't expect Drew Aller to be able to make them pay for some mistakes in coverage, because until I see that happen, I'm going to assume it won't. And the passes that Kyle McCord missed that were open to receivers this past week, I expect JJ McCarthy to hit. Now he doesn't have Ohio State's receivers. JJ McCarthy doesn't, but from what I saw from Penn State's secondary, they should still be okay. And also the coverage we saw, Cade Stover have a big game. Colston Loveland is really, really good. And if you're going to focus on him, A.J. Barner just put up 99 yards on Michigan State. Not that he's going to do that every single week, but he's a solid number 2 Big Ten tight end and has been for a number of years. And so I feel like where Ohio State failed to pound it in, I think Michigan will. And I wouldn't be surprised if it's Ohio State probably should have won like 30-7, not letting that last one get in, and then also converting on the missed field goal and the touchdown at the 2-yard line. So I could see something, 27-10, something like that. And my thoughts on Penn State have really kind of, I don't have high expectations for them in that game, but it is life on the road in the Big Ten at Penn State. I assume that's a big noon. I don't even know what the situation on that one is, but Jim Harbaugh has not had the best success on the road other than the last 2 years where he's had all of the success on the road. And so we'll see what kind of advanced scouting they have done and go from there.
The Penn State-Michigan game is at noon in Happy Valley. So that's, that's a nice little bonus for Michigan to not have to play at night there. That, I think Penn State, I'm with you. I watched Penn State in person and kind of went, oh, well, turns out they have not played great opposition so far. And, theoretically it's possible that could happen to Michigan too the first time they really get tested, but it doesn't feel like that's probably going to be the case. Again, like I said earlier, you can play crappy opposition for a while, and I kind of go, yeah, okay, I'll withhold judgment until you play someone real. Like if you're doing to crappy opposition what Michigan has been doing to crappy opposition, at some point it starts meaning something. It's like Florida State back in the day in the ACC when they would just murder everyone, and it was like, well, eventually you win enough 30-point games against lousy conference opposition that it starts to really, be a pretty good indication that, yes, you are in fact legit. And it feels like we've crossed that line with Michigan. But yeah, we'll see. We'll see what it looks like in Happy Valley in a couple weeks. But yeah, I'm with you. The Drew Aller performance in person, the lack of explosive running plays in person, the lack of wide receiver talent, nothing there said this is a team that is going to be the first one to get to the end goal against the Michigan defense all year.
We're still waiting for an end goal situation against the Michigan defense. I would have missed that if it had happened in any of the fourth quarters this season because I haven't seen in one of them. But apparently that is still the case. So I think that will do it for this episode. Want to thank you all for joining us. As always, we invite you to find us at BuckeyeHuddle.com. If you're not yet a member, join up, see how things are going over there. Plenty of recruiting stuff coming down the pike because of the huge Penn State visit. Lots of recruits chiming in with their thoughts on what they saw. And, of course, plenty of behind-the-scenes stuff talking about the team and the upcoming schedule and things like that. So if you haven't yet, join us, see what you think of it. Of course, find us at youtube.com/BuckeyeHuddle. Hit the bell to be notified whenever we go live. Go ahead and hit the thumbs up on this one. Subscribe if you haven't. And, of course, if you're listening on any podcast platform, a 5-star rating and review is always appreciated. So with that, I want to thank you all for tuning in, and we will talk to you guys later.